All right, so this is our panel. We'll take the next 45 minutes. And what we're talking about in this panel is the transition from L2 to L3. What does it mean to be takeover ready and those sorts of things. We'll do some quick introductions. Again, if you're just joining us, my name is Michael Nees. I'm a professor in the Department of Psychology at Lafayette College, and I study human factors of in-vehicle technologies. Let's go over here.
Hey everyone, this is Pranit Nelapati. I'm from General Motors. I work on the autonomy stacks of radar and hardware and software sort of things.
I'm Adrian Hill from Cirrus Logic, and I work a lot with the audio systems and haptics, focused on the HMI in the interior and the cabin.
I'm Robert Fuchs from JTEKT Corporation, responsible of collaborative steering.
I'm Fabiano Ruaro with Bosch, product manager for interior sensing solutions.
My name is Alexandra Mueller. I am a senior research scientist at the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety.
Well, thanks, everyone. We're glad all of you are here, and thanks for joining us. I know that the SAE definitions and levels have been sort of controversial from just about the moment that they were released, right? But we're talking about the difference between SAE Level 2 versus Level 3, and I think it kind of makes sense to start off with a brief discussion about what is that distinction and why does it matter? Who'd like to get us started? Alex.
All right, well, I'm going to start. So it often helps to describe this in terms of responsibility. Who is responsible for what and when? When it comes to partial driving automation, you can have incredibly sophisticated support, longitudinal, lateral, continuous support from the vehicle for extended periods, but the responsibility still falls on the driver to maintain the safety of the vehicle and the vehicle's behavior. And in the context of level 3 driving automation or conditional automation, the responsibility varies depending on the party for different conditions. When level 3 driving automation is operating, this is a technology that assumes the responsibility for safety and responsibility for maintaining that safety under very, very specific conditions. When it leaves those conditions, the transition of responsibility for safe driving goes to the driver. And how those transitions occur are actually a huge sticking point in terms of the realization of this technology. So,
anyone else want to add to that?
I think we saw in your presentation already the confusion we get from level 2, levels of automation, and then we can only see, what kind of challenges are ahead of us then when we talk about level 3.
And I think additionally, if you think of level 2 versus level 3, level 2 now with adaptive cruise control moving to full self-driving, it's really a value proposition from the OEMs. This is a product that an owner is going to have to purchase. And so it's normal for them to want to make sure that this is a valuable, attractive proposition. The more that it supports the driver, to your point, the more attractive it is as a product. That at a certain moment, the responsibility, the ownership of supervising the vehicle has to be clear. I think that sometimes that's at odds with trying to sell that feature, right?
yeah, as we've seen, sophistication of the technology is not the definition of level 2 versus level 3. It's about who assumes the responsibility of what and when. That's where the distinction lies, and that's where it gets very messy, because you have systems that have all these really fascinating and technologically advanced systems that still, at the end of the day, the legalese says, you as the owner, you have to make sure this is okay, this is safe, this is used properly. Not so easy.
I think this is what you see with the transition to the level 2++. You know, when you were, sorry for the words, but just to make sure we understand, when level 2 was on highway, okay, no, not much question. But when the car can go off highway in urban areas, and you still say it's level 2, it can be, for the end user, it can be confusing. But the responsibility, as Alexandra said, is to the user, whatever the capability is of the car.
In this interesting kind of distinction about the kind of technical levels and the engineering version of things versus the version of responsibility that's communicated to the driver, because at the end of the day, that's what they care about, what they need to do at a given point in time. Can we talk about the sensing issue? There's sort of these exterior sensing issues about the vehicle conditions, the driving conditions, and whether it's safe for an L2 or an L3 mode to be engaged. But there's also these interior sensing technologies about whether the driver is in the sort of right state of mind for the particular mode of the vehicle. So some of you all that have expertise in sensing, could you tell us a little bit about the types of sensing technologies that are being developed or in development right now?
Yeah, maybe I can talk about it. So primarily on the exterior side, we definitely have the optical sensors on the cameras. Of course, LiDARs are becoming very mainstream on that. Radars have been also a very integral orthogonal products that are helping us. InCabin is slightly behind. I think it's catching up, but InCabin is becoming a little more complex because of the human aspects, especially with the privacy and other aspects that are also being heavily regulated. So we, at least from an OEM standpoint, we see that this is going to be some kind of a fusion system that is going to shape up with a combination of radars and cameras. But at the same time, I think it also takes time, because what we are also seeing is consumers' trust is not built overnight. So they need to experience some of these systems. When we developed Super Cruise, it took quite a bit of time for the drivers to be educated about it, and they started trusting it, and they did not see the camera as something that is, creating a conflict to their private lives. But that being said, I think most of the technology is there, but can you make it much more integral to the cabin is where at least the hardware challenge lies primarily. And just to extend that, so far the interior and exterior sensors are in their own ecosystems, but going forward, there is a huge necessity to start merging them together, because as Alexandra rightfully pointed out, it's the environment, reacting to the environment, what is happening, and that should be a precognition to the interior sensing systems. Otherwise, that is bound to fail at some point.
Fabiano, you want to add to that?
I can only agree. I think the interior sensing, which is my area within Bosch, it's relatively new compared to ADAS and the sensors we have out there, but it has hit the market already. We are getting already field information from the systems, and I totally agree that the key is the integration between these two. I mean, we within Bosch, having both systems, we're constantly looking into how do we cooperate, how do we use one of the systems, taking into consideration the context that is given by the other. For example, the ADAS, the exterior sensors providing the context, and how much you take from the interior sensing then at those moments.
It's also worth noting that the cameras and different hardware implementations, drivers begin to ignore those very quickly. Like, you can put a GoPro in front of someone and they forget it's there after an hour. So sensitivity to hardware presence diminishes very, very quickly as a whole, and that's actually very useful.
And Alex, in your talk, you mentioned mode confusion, and I think that there's all of this talk about takeover, right? And I think that's the idea that the automation is engaged, but something happens, and now the driver needs to re-engage a sort of manual driving mode. But before we get to that, there's a thing that I think some of us would describe as a handover, which seems has been overshadowed a bit by the talk about takeovers, but is also important for avoiding mode confusion, right? This transition from manual driving to engaging that L2, L3 automation. Can we talk a little bit about what that looks like? When would we allow that sort of transition to occur? When can a driver engage those L2, L3 systems? What are the circumstances required?
There's a lot of aspects of the HMI that are really need to be optimized for the L3 handover. We heard in the previous presentation that we're trying to move away from a monitoring enforcement type of system to something which is collaborative. I mean, we all understand there is a legal responsibility in that handover, but at the same time, it has to feel like a collaborative engagement. And giving the HMI, whether that's through audio or haptics or through display or lighting, a readiness indication, which is natural to the driver, and then having a natural communication of that handover, I think is very key in building trust. I think equally, there's a lot of focus on the taking back or the handing back. And because that seems to be the corner case everybody's worried about, you have to do that more urgently. But I think equally, when you're building trust for a collaborative driving with the L3, a lot of we should talk about that initial phase where you're preparing the driver to release the responsibility to the vehicle. I think that's important in building trust.
But also, not just that, but for the vehicle to anticipate failure. What happens if that handshake, handover, whatever, what if it fails? How can the vehicle compensate and create a safety buffer? That's where the challenge really, really lies, because how do you identify that failure? How do you identify when the handover has not been successful? I don't think anyone has the answer for that, but it's just how do you do it?
Right, and we know that mode confusion is one of the classic problems of automation. Just a quick technical note, we're being asked to make sure we speak into our microphones so it broadcasts out. Well, thinking about the handover, let's talk about takeover, right? We're in an automated mode, and now we're asking the driver to take back over control. What do you think it would be like in an ideal sense for the driver to be takeover ready? Like, what does that mean to us? Robert, do you want to give it a shot?
From level 3?
Sure.
I think Alexandra explained very well. Before talking about readiness, is how much time do you have? How capable is the car to diagnose the situation and itself? And then we can find hundreds of studies about how many seconds the driver needs to be back in the loop. Do you have these seconds? I think it's very challenging.
Right, the timing, right? And I think it's going to depend on a lot of different variables, how much time the driver needs to be re-engaged. Anyone else want to add to that? Praneeth?
Yeah, I think primarily the difference I've seen between L2 and L3 is L2 we always assume, the keyword is assume, that driver is plugged into that awareness. I think L3, a lot of OEMs are trying to promise that, look, you get some of your time back, right? So there is a convenience factor coming into that. That kind of changes the landscape quite a bit, because now how much awareness is the minimum awareness and how quickly can you catch them up is, I think, a challenge that whenever I hear a static 3 seconds, 5 seconds, or 10 seconds, it's more added for convenience, but I think the problem is like much deeper than that.
Well, and attention versus intention. Like, I know you can speak a lot more about that. So
yes.
Distinguishing that and being able to characterize it, the difference between attention and intention is hugely relevant for level 3 driving automation, because essentially you've allowed conditions for the driver to exit the loop. And to get them to re-enter the loop, you need to know what they intend to do beyond just coarse behavioral indicators that they're exhibiting in that moment, that you are inferring where their attention is allocated, what they're doing. All we have are indicators, no measurement of true attention, and it gets even messier when you try to understand where the driver's intention is. The driver might be looking at the road, but they may not intend to apply the brakes, even though there's a bunch of 18-wheelers that are braking heavily in front. How the vehicle understands that, responds to that, and interprets that, it's a very open question right now.
Adrian.
Yeah. And I think we have to
Into the mic.
We have to consider as well. There's the emergency situation, if you like, an emergency takeover, and there are always other aspects of the safety system which are in play. So if it's an emergency situation where the intention is to give back control to the driver, but there is an obstacle which is going to cause an accident, then of course braking the car automatically, bring it to a safe state, whether that's the hazard lights on, staying in the center lane. We know that that's not ideal, but certainly that's an option which is safer than not braking.
That's the buffer.
That's the buffer.
That's the buffer.
But I think there's also needs to be focus on the non-emergency events. So when we talk about readiness, is it 3 seconds, 5 seconds, 10 seconds? That implies that the vehicle knows nothing of its context, and then all of a sudden knows everything. But that's simply not the case. I mean, if you're approaching a junction 20 seconds, 30 seconds away, that can be a kind of soft re-engagement, whether that's some haptic information, whether it's an increase in lighting, whether it's some soft audio chimes that are ramping. Those can be done in a personalized way, in a spatial way, if you have the technology embedded in the UX. I mean, I think this is all about turning it into a collaborative experience that adds value to the user, rather than making it feel like an ADAS system.
You're talking about gradients. You're talking about gradients. You're talking about, it's not a ballistic all or nothing. There's a way you can cocoon and shape the driver's expectations in a way that's not oppressive, in a way that reinforces the driver as a partner, but in a way that also allows the driver to better proactively engage with what the system is intending the driver to do based on what the system is sensing around. And again, there's ways to use that gradient, to use escalation based on what we know about modality, communication, and preferences among the general public. There's a lot that can be done, especially, and Fabiano can speak to this more, about the idea of fusion. How do you integrate all these signals that the vehicle has in a way that nuances vehicle response and outcomes?
Yeah,
Fabiano, jump in.
Yeah, I was going to add, I mean, how do we prepare for that situation? And I think the word that comes to me is orchestration. I mean, between, not more than fusion, it's orchestration among all of these different sensing and actuators that we have. We talked about exterior ADAS, interior sensing, HMI. And I think the question in front of us is also who is going to be responsible for this orchestration and how these are all going to work together, because it needs to be orchestrated with the human at the center. I mean, how the human is prepared for the takeover.
But if we go back to the definition of L3, because this is where we started, the manual intervention is to take over a failure of the automation, isn't it, in the definition? And now what we are talking about is an ODD problem, and we are back to L2, L2 plus, things like
and
that.
And we are never, ever going to embrace L2 plus, like, L2 plus,
you know,
plus.
like how it sounds like how to give value to level 3 by restraining ODD.
And I think that there's always been sort of a paradox to me with the L3, right? You're not at L4 where you're going to take responsibility for everything, and somehow you're saying, okay, I'm okay right now, but in some moment in time in the future, 3 seconds, 5 seconds from now, I'm not going to be okay, and that buffer is enough to be sure that we can have the driver take over ready. And I think one of the things we're getting at is it's just not at all clear what that buffer is, or if the L3 is even capable of meeting that sort of requirement to have a buffer where the human would be able to resume control safely. Praneeth, you said, looked like you were going to say something.
No, I think I kind of like, I agree to whatever the comments that are being made here. I think the issue also is about that buffer, right? How do we define that buffer? It becomes a very critical attribute because it's not just the host vehicle that is being in trouble, but let's say if we are changing our behavior and if the environment around us is also reacting to that, right? If someone is trying to make a lane change towards this lane, now you're making a decision to switch over, which means that the driver now has its own pattern of driving. Can that be, detrimental? Those are the things that I think we are all trying to learn. And ultimately, it's coming down to how much buffer is too much buffer, or how much buffer is the minimum that before we even have the confidence to engage this. Because as the colleagues here mentioned, switching between L2 and L3 too quickly may just deter a lot of customers to say, yep, you know what, like I'm just going to stick with L2, right?
But you just raised something that's really important. Too long buffer. Yeah. That is something we've actually seen, and there's quite a bit of data showing that human beings are very good at figuring out the point of no return. And they will wait until that point of no return, even when the vehicle is taking all these proactive steps to help the driver prepare for the handshake or whatever. People will still start slacking. They will start making shortcuts. And how do you design with that human tendency, right? If everyone's going to wait until the point of no return to start taking actions, then your buffer actually is layered in terms of immediacy and efficacy. And that starts contaminating a lot of your safety envelope estimations. So, not easy.
Yeah, the example there that, I mean, if you're disrespecting the toy, then we take the toy away. I mean,
there is that, and then people go, "But I paid for this toy.
I paid for this
Why
toy.
Why are you taking this toy away from me?"
Now I'm abusing it, so the toy goes away until the next ignition cycle.
And then people say, "I'm never buying this car ever again," and so and then you have a failure. Then you have a product failure. So it has to be designed in a way that the consumer understands, the consumer accepts, and the consumer then figures out how to work with it. Because if you just start having these, and I don't want to call it abuse or misuse, because it's not. That's not what it is. It's just human behavior. So if you start waiting until the point of no return for your intervention every single time, then what does that leave the vehicle in terms of having an adapted buffer if that buffer, the first 10 seconds of it is pointless? And the driver is just going to not engage. Or the driver engages in a way that the vehicle doesn't want or isn't appropriate. That's also an outcome.
Right, that behavioral adaptation that comes with automation, right? We're not just designing for a static human, we're designing for a human that will interact with that technology and change their behavior accordingly when they know what that, then learn what that technology does. I'm curious to know what you all think, where do we currently stand with our ability to infer driver states? Let's go to you, Fabiano.
Yeah, maybe I'll start. So I think we have plenty of information available, my personal opinion, in terms of driver states at this moment, mostly from cameras, but also from multimodal sensors. So it's more in the context of which ones, I mean, we have been talking about this business versus what we really need, and this definition that is still coming in our direction at this point. But we do have ways to monitor all in, the driver as well as the occupant, as well gaze information. Even you can use other sensing modalities, for example, even audio in the cabin, and we can add all of those. We already have progress made in that direction. But I think what lays ahead is really how are we going to take all of this information, how we're going to facilitate this human factor for the takeover. Yeah.
Not to mention states tend to co-occur.
Anyone else want to jump in on that?
Yeah, like from a sensing standpoint, I think the hardware is developing pretty in the right direction. Because I think, especially the gaze, you know, the heartbeat monitoring, and you know, the kind of like the breathing patterns, all of those information is available. But I think the challenge is, if you throw this into an AI system, can you infer it correctly? Because the same driver could be very different in terms of behavior on a Monday morning versus a Friday afternoon, right?
Or the beginning of the trip to the end of the trip.
Exactly. So it's the kind of deterministic versus probabilistic actions need to be studied, and ultimately, where do we draw the line in a global driver pattern versus a local driver pattern also becomes a very interesting exercise.
And I like that you pulled the magic word that I was trying to avoid, AI. So, but I think AI, agentic AI, are really what can help us in this orchestration. We have enough information, in my opinion, already, or the hardware available for all of this information. But how do we use that information to really bring something and focus on the human? Right. And I think I wanted to mention that. I mean,
Robert?
There is one more point. Maybe it's a half a question, half a statement, but there is also the time scale we have here, understanding the driver state. How fast can you do that? You know, Alexandra talked about the intent, not only the gaze. You can watch somewhere, having your gaze somewhere. They are not actually aiming that point, and you know, with gaze we are always scanning the road, and it doesn't give you any information if you are really engaged, etc., etc. So we have many information about the state, but do we really know the state at a given point of time? How accurate is it? This is my question.
Hello. You can infer not from only one sensor, but you can have vital signs information, you can have the gaze information, but you have a good point. I mean, how do we take all of that into consideration? That's where we are bringing we have to use this software technologies then on top of all of these different hardwares, because it will give you only some specific information about where you're looking at versus what else you can take from the context and from the history of that specific drive. We also talked about mood or the time of the day when you're driving and learning from the drive. I think this is definitely needed. Yeah.
I think we talk about it still in the monitoring context, though, and I want to believe that we can design systems that are more collaborative than that. So with the UX design, especially looking at the HMI aspects, again, whether those are audio systems, lighting systems, displays, haptics, I mean, we do have the opportunity, even if the driver is currently disengaged, doing their own thing. I mean, that's the promise of the product, right? You can do your own thing while the vehicle is taking you from A to B, that we can still have some kind of, some subtle interaction, whether it's prompts, whether it's check-ins. I'd like to believe we can design an HMI which can check in with the driver without disrupting the value that they're getting from the L3 functionality, but still maintaining a kind of closed loop in the interaction. And I think that really speaks to the collaborative nature we need L3 to be, especially when we talk about handover.
I love that comment. I mean, let's call it stimulation as well. When you
Absolutely,
don't have enough information from the driver at that moment that you need it, then you can use stimulation. How to do that and not make it become an annoyance that we have been talking about before. So maybe using conversational AI agents, something that is customizable to that specific customer or driver, might be the way.
Well, this is the moment where I should do a pitch for my haptics and other interaction on the booth 110 over there, Cirrus Logic, but I won't do that. The point is that I think designing soft interactions in the UX before you get to that point of hard interruption, I think getting that collaborative UX is really important, designing that, because at the end of the day, it's an expensive product, people are going to have to pay for it, and they want to feel that they're working with the vehicle, and there's a value to that.
And that's where I wanted to go next. Let's talk about the HMI, right? Because I'm a psychologist. Say we solve the problem of inferring states, intentions, and we know all of those things. I can give you lots of examples of when I know exactly what people are doing and what state they're in, but getting them to change their behavior is darn near impossible, right? And so where are we at with respect to HMIs, and say we know what people are doing, how do we communicate to them the steps they need to take to be takeover ready?
Maybe I'll go first.
Thank you.
So from a HMI standpoint, I think one of the things that we noticed in the past, and I think a lot of industries also, is trying to understand what a good guideline is in terms of alerting a generic driver versus understanding the exact driver that is in the driving seat, and creating the system that they will appreciate that they are brought into the loop for. Those, again, that global versus local challenge is becoming that mainstream use case, at least to where I am looking at this. And that is actually driving a lot of HMI related things. I think there is a lot of studies about what catches attention, right? And like what kind of, I think, entire our user experience, we have teams who are looking at these kind of challenges, focused on it to get exactly what the team has mentioned is how quickly can you bring them into the loop without them being panicked, right? Because the panic state is the thing that we absolutely want to avoid if we want our system safety state, to be preserved.
So it's worth thinking about when we say alerts, what is the purpose of an alert? Because we have many alerts. We're sensing a lot of things. First and foremost, you have to have a triage method, right? And you have to have a triage method for your sensing because you need to know what to prioritize signal-wise in order to make decisions about and then make actions around, right? From the vehicle's point of view. And so when you start triaging certain signals, that also informs a triaging of certain vehicle responses, like alerts or other countermeasures. With alerts and countermeasures, whether they are invisible to the driver or whether they're explicit, transparency matters. So cause and effect. For an alert, an explicit thing that the driver is interacting with, because drivers don't interact with the sensing, they interact with the physical outcomes, the responses by the vehicle. That is what they interact with. And because that's what they interact with, in order to understand the cause and effect of what caused this vehicle response, the more transparent it is, that causal nature, the more you're likely to get the right response from the driver as a result. When people don't understand why they are getting explicit alerts or countermeasures, you get that muddiness, you get the variability in behavior, the inconsistencies, whereas when you're transparent and the cause and effect is transparent to the driver, this is also known as intuitiveness, but when it's transparent to the driver, that's when you start being able to shape specific behaviors. But transparency has its limits, because when it comes to partial driving automation or conditional automation, sometimes you need more complex behaviors than can be communicated transparently in alert, right? And how do you shape that? That comes with other design. That usually comes through interactions with the interfaces.
And I want to ask Robert, because I know you work in shared control and the sort of haptic aspect of the HMI. Do you see a role for haptics in this sort of HMI design for level 3 and takeovers?
Yes, but of course, I think when I heard about this transition between level 3 and level 2, it looks like it's a point of time, like now you have to be level 2, now you are in charge, and it's not. When you have cooperative steering, you can, the car is always available, the steering is always available for the takeover, so haptics is very important, and it helps you to get into the loop because you have the haptic feedback, you understand what's going on. And haptics is very intuitive, most intuitive sense.
Adrian.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, haptics is important because it's one of the most natural sensing modalities we have. I think it's also important to understand that the proportionality of the alert or the communication is important. So, for example, if you're driving down the Las Vegas Strip and you have a lighting alert, that might need to be a lot more brash than if you're on a quiet, dark evening driving and you still want to provide the same alert. Equally with audio, if you're in a vehicle which is full of noisy children, as mine often is, you might want a more aggressive audio alert, or could be a personalized audio alert, just coming through the headrest audio, for example, for the driver, but still it has to be a higher gain, let's say. And I think for haptics as well, the haptics, if you're in a rough road environment, you're driving, maybe the haptics need to be really ramped up. Again, providing an appropriate or a proportionate level for the alert. I think that's a part of the HMI design, which is really important because not the same level works in every situation. It's very much contextual.
Yeah, something we can add about haptics is that the sense is diffused in the body. Yeah? As you say, if you're on a rough road, you already feel, even if you have your hands off, your body is already aware of what's going on. And then if you touch, you just add to this vision, hearing is on off. Huh? If you are disengaged, you don't see. If you don't look, you don't see.
So it sounds like multimodality of interfaces is important here. I want to change gears just a little bit. Right now, who's responsible if something goes wrong in a level 3 system, and who should be responsible? Do you want to start, Praneeth?
Yeah, I think that's where I think that L2++ and other things are coming in, right? Like, which is always about how much convenience can you provide, but at the same time, like, I think that is where there is a divided opinion widely in the industry about, hey, like, there are some teams that believe that, look, allowing someone to have a coffee in the car is probably good enough to be categorized as that, that plus symbol things, right? But then there is another thing is, look, I want that 1 hour back, right? Like whatever the commute time is. So in that cases, I think if the system is truly promising what it is promising, that you can have that time back, then it will become the system's responsibility. But if the system is modeled with driver as one of the building blocks, unfortunately, driver's actions cannot be, kind of separated from that. So I think it's all coming down to the system and the intent of the design of that system. That's pretty important.
This is a data issue. Because how is the vehicle classifying whether the L3 operation was operating at the time of the crash versus was there a quick transition to level 2 and was the baton of responsibility quickly passed before so the vehicle can be basically relinquished of its responsibility? Because no, just before the crash we were in partial 2 level 2 automation. It's not our fault that this crashed, right? And what that completely disregards is that crashes have preceding events that led to them, and how data are stored, how they're categorized, how a vehicle is designed to respond when a near crash situation is happening. All of this is speaking to an issue in terms of how we talk about automation. We often refer to automation as a mechanism to get us from point A to point B, but it doesn't have to be like that. Years ago, Hyundai Mobius proposed that concept of using automation as a more sophisticated mechanism for crash avoidance technology. If safety is the penultimate goal, crash avoidance technology is where the investment should be made. We're talking about sensing. We're talking about adaptive, nuanced tailoring of vehicle responses to the driver, to the events that are happening around the vehicle. Well, adaptive ADAS is where the future is then for making safer systems, more contextually informed and nuanced systems that are more acceptable to consumers. But if we're talking about driving automation in terms of different levels of responsibility, and when the vehicle can occupy more of the responsibility than is traditionally allocated, then you start raising the question of, is that about safety or is this about convenience? And are the two sometimes at odds? They don't necessarily have to be, but they require a zeitgeist shift in terms of how we talk about automation. Instead, if we're talking about automation for the purpose of enhancing safety, we're talking about MRM capability, safe haven capability when you have a non-responsive or incapacitated driver. You start having systems where they employ level 3 support to find those safe havens, not to get you to your destination, but just so that you don't crash on the road if you suddenly become impaired for some reason. And while balancing that, there's also the question of over-reliance. If you have a system that is safety designed for finding those safe havens, that is designed specifically in a way to avoid over-reliance, whereas the way we conventionally talk about level 3 driving automation is to allow the driver to check out while they're trying to get to their destination, rather than having a mechanism that is only available if something goes terribly wrong, that has level 3 capability, because only then, within the right conditions, can the vehicle actually step in to truly compensate for the driver to find a safe haven, right, not to get to their point B destination.
Yeah, big difference between a convenience feature versus a safety feature across the line, from design, engineering to marketing, probably. Adrian, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when we talk about crash and we talk about safety, it's difficult not to talk about things without talking about insurance and insurability. And I think that one of the things that has happened over the last decade as more and more ADAS systems have been applied to vehicles is the insurance companies speak, right? And they will actually approve or give discounts. I think that insurability of vehicles equipped with L3 will ultimately be one of the reasons to buy. I mean, if it's a system which is executed well and the statistics say that it's a safety enhancement, then that could be another part of the value propositions. Not only the collaboration, not only this promise of giving some time back, maybe the promise of having better insurance rates is a good reason to buy as well.
So when we're talking about insurance, it's really important to realize that you have to use a technology in order to have any benefit, whether it's convenience or safety. And with insurance, that is why crash avoidance technology is prioritized, but level 2 driving automation is not necessary. It depends on the company, depends on the insurer, but conventionally, when safety is the priority, when safety is a reason for a discount or whatever, it's because a lot of those systems can be on by default, whereas level 2 driving automation, level 3 driving automation, that is something a driver elects to activate. They don't have to use it in order to use the vehicle. And so that gets us into sort of murky waters of, is that really a safety system that will reduce claims, or is it something that if there's not enough prevalence in the registered fleet, then it's not going to have a signal at all?
And we're down to our last couple of minutes here, so I want to give everyone a chance for some parting thoughts. And the thing that I'm thinking about now is that kind of the market question. Is this something drivers want? We've identified a lot of potential complications with L3, a lot of potential confusion for drivers, a lot of potential safety issues. Is this something that is marketable? Is there a value proposition for drivers? So maybe sort of 30 seconds each. Let's go to Praneeth.
Yeah, I think definitely there is interest, but again, the industry and the market is kind of divided on it. But I personally believe that L3, the data point that, as some of us mentioned, is very, very critical, because the human factors is something that is really missing from the loop so far. And L3, I believe, will put a lot of weightage towards that, meaning even going to L4 and L5 systems, that data can become an industry standard in terms of what guidelines and requirements can be designed and maybe even driving patterns could be encouraged based on that. That will come into practice in the next 5 to 10 years.
Right. Adrian.
Yeah, I think for me, having experienced some of the level 2 systems, some of the better ones, they're full self-driving, they're Super Cruise. I mean, those for me are already very valuable in terms of just longer drives and fatigue. I can't wait till level 3 is here, and what I want it to be is a collaborative experience, and I want the vehicle to make me feel like we're doing this together. I think when that happens, the market will instantly flip, and we'll have many, many people putting that on their shopping list for new vehicles.
Robert.
From what I see from the market, from the beginning of this year, some German OEMs stopped their program of level 3 to go to 2++. Yeah, level 2 of highway. I think the use case, the value to the customer is not yet defined. The use case will decide, I guess.
Right. Fabiano.
I am totally convinced that drivers want it. It's totally connected or in sync with today's way of life, of using your time, having more time available also during your commute and so on. But I totally agree. The technology challenges that we're having, I mean, and the whole ecosystem that needs to work together to achieve that is maybe giving us a reality shock of how to get there. But I'm totally convinced that it is really in sync with the way of life expectations we have nowadays.
Alex.
We have a cost of living crisis right now. These technologies are expensive. They're expensive, and we have already seen several automakers abandon their level 3 driving automation programs for good reason, because they've proved to be non-profitable. Those systems, those programs involve very expensive vehicles. The jury is still very much out about a safety case, a true safety case being made for level 3 driving automation. For the convenience, a true convenience case still remains to be made because it's so hypothetical. It's relying on mechanisms that don't exist right now, technology and supervision capabilities, interface capabilities. I mean, only recently have ICUs in vehicles been designed in a way that are more holistic to combine more signals from different conventional siloed departments. We're changing, but because the vehicles are changing so much right now, it really raises the question of, if safety is your priority, why are we not investing more in adaptive crash avoidance technology to make it more usable, more ubiquitous, more equal, like in terms of raising the equality and accessibility? Why are we not doing that if safety is the so-called priority for level 3 driving conditional automation? If it's not, then how do we ensure that adaptive ADAS be incorporated into the level 3 ecosystem so that we don't have issues of automation operating without even the conventional crash avoidance technology buffer and safety envelope?
I think that's a great stopping point. This was fun. Thank you all so much. Nice job, everyone. Thank you for sharing your time with us. And we will move on to the final speaker of the session. So thank you all so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.